I'm Indy Nidell. Welcome to a Great War special episode about Greek rifles and pistols of the First World War. All right, you ready to move on to some of the Greek stuff? Or?
Sure. Now, the Greeks would adopt another version of the same system, again, a descendant of the German Gewehr 1888. So, let me make sure I'm pulling my right guy. They would, around 1904, 1905, start pulling in what they called the model 1903. I hope that's not too confusing. But this actually bears Otto Schönauer's name. So this is the mannlicher-schoenauer. Now again, just to recap, we have a German Gewehr 88 style gun, which borrowed from the Mauser 71. Okay, so Schlegel-Milch reworks this Mauser 71 to get the 88. And then Schönauer reworks the Schlegel-Milch design to get this, and then he reworks it again to add a new magazine system. And that magazine system is honestly a thing of beauty. So let me get where I can poke it out, because that's going to be the most fascinating thing to everybody on this show. I just have to push and twist, and if we zoom in, this gun's defining feature is the fact that it uses a rotary magazine. Again, we have that same sort of bolt action, although we have a slightly different ejector. It's mounted on the left side of the bolt. We have our long-range adjustable sights. We have generally, I mean, honestly, it should look pretty familiar. This is all standard Steyr export Mannlicher stuff. We've lightened up the bolt handle a bit, but no big changes in the action. The big changes are in the magazine. Instead of an end block clip that goes in and stays in, we now have a stripper clip. So we would put in our stripper clip, strip them out, clip goes flying, and then they strip into this guy. And as they strip in, it rotates. And so it'll spin around until 5 rounds are in, and then when the next round gets fed forward, it clicks forward, clicks forward. There's a spring in there. It wants to pop back up. Now, what that does in terms of feeding is that it's not feeding straight up from underneath the bolt. It's feeding a little bit from the side onto a ramp. It's a very positive controlled feed. There's no looseness or wiggling around in there. So when you bolt forward, you can barely feel that you picked up a cartridge. That makes this one of the smoothest bolt action rifles ever made. As a matter of fact, these were so popular on the commercial market that to this day, the commercial versions that were made at that time for hunting are more valuable than the military ones. So people cut these up. They get the Greek ones. It's almost as good as the commercial one because it's so fine of a rifle. You can have a $2,000 hunting rifle, well, this is going back 30, 40, 50, 60 years. I mean, this was done for a century practically, but to give you some numbers, and these are going to change by the decade, but roughly what would be a $2,000 sporting rifle, well, you could get one of these for like $500 and then cut it up and get that $2,000 sporting rifle. Now, of course, in the 70s, it would be you know, an $800 rifle versus a $100 rifle or something like that. But to give you an idea of the scale, you could get a much finer rifle quality by cutting up one of these Greek surplus guns when they weren't worth anything at that time. Which is why these are rare, because they were sort of cannibalized by people that wanted to get good sporting rifles after the wars. But these were ordered by the Greeks, the 1903. There would be a later 1903-14, which is actually less common in the war, because again, as the war starts, Austria-Hungary starts to seize guns, and then you'll have these in their original chambering and also rechambered. So Austria-Hungary is going to field these in addition to the Greeks, but this is the dedicated Greek rifle, is the 1903 and the 1903-14. It's interesting because I still cannot figure out why they bought it. It is probably the most expensive, complicated bolt-action rifle ever fielded, and Greece bought it. They couldn't sell it. The Portuguese thought about it and they just didn't bite. A bunch of other countries looked at it and found it fascinating and did not bite. Only Greece bought. I can only imagine what sort of backroom deal was made to get these things into Greek hands, but they're ridiculously pricey for that time. So it's kind of funny, but the Greeks actually, their primary rifle, which again, just like Romania, once the war starts, they can't get any more. And they have to start borrowing heavily from their reserves. And we'll talk more about that in a moment because it's so quintessentially Greek, I do have to mention it. But again, bad decision. I mean, you've pissed off your supplier, and you already have a very expensive and complicated and slow to manufacture rifle as it is. I really can't understand why they went into something like the Great War with something so hard to produce. Now, in terms of being an actual soldier in the field, you couldn't get much better. This gun runs extremely well. It's extremely smooth. It's extremely accurate. It's still prized today for all these qualities. You really, even in their worst condition, they're almost never seized. They're almost never binding. They're beautiful guns. It's just odd that they spent so much money on them.
That's quite interesting, actually. I know people will know from the channel, over the last 5 or 6 months, we've talked a lot about what's going on in Greece, which is still, well, neutral, except for the half of Greece that 100 years ago has already declared war on the Central Powers, but that was Eleftherios Venizelos' government, and not the royalists, led by King Constantine and his wife Sophia, who was the Kaiser's sister. So you have a really bizarre, complicated situation anyway in that country, and I imagine I could be totally wrong, but I imagine there was a great deal of money to be made, one, in ordering those weapons, but two, as you did say, that they were fantastically good weapons. Greece was always going to be a small player in the war, even when Greece joined the war anyhow. Maybe it was to capitalize on, since they weren't going to send 3 million, 4 million men to the war, maybe they'll just send them with the best guns they could. That's just speculation.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, these were acquired before there was any sign of World War I. They didn't know that that's what they were getting into, although when they tried to order more with the 1903-14, they did know war was on the horizon, and that contract really didn't pay out for them very well until more flowed in after the war because they were surrendered as reparations. You'll see things like these guns end up in Italy. Italy refurbishes them through the 20s and sells them on to Greece because Austria can't produce them for Greece anymore because of different treaties and things. So it looks like most of the 1903-14s, the ones like this one with the full handguard and some other little features, it looks like they really showed up in Greece post-war and mostly did service in Austria-Hungary.
But when did Greece start ordering these? When?
It looks like, and I'm going off the top of my head again, but I believe it's like 1904, 1905 is when you start seeing the orders come through. They had enough for their own peacetime army. They weren't short on them until they really started mobilizing. But when they mobilized, they actually had a ton of guns in inventory that were an old familiar that we did not get to talk about with France very much, which is the Gras. They actually had ordered tons of Gras, also produced in Austria. This really is like the national rifle of Greece. Like people, if we have any Greeks watching, I guarantee the minute they say the Gras, they light up because this gun is more identifiable than any in their history because they were carried up into the mountains and never came back down. I mean, you see these in rebel photos in 1945. Like they never left the country. They're reliable. They're hard hitting. Yes, they're black powder, but it seems like they never ran out of the ammo somehow. And they did the job. They're single shot by all means, but they still got the job done for the Greeks. And this is really one of their favorite guns. Now, the other thing is you mentioned the Balkan Wars. Greece would also have a ton of captured Ottoman weapons and neighboring weapons that they would also field to reserve troops. The problem with that is having enough ammo to keep them on the front lines, not so much. So in terms of actual combat, you either see the pride of Greece, which is the mannlicher-schoenauer, or you actually see a lot of these in combat because the ammo's there and they can be logistically maneuvered. But that's really about it. Those are the two big guns and then a lot of captured stuff. Greece would have the notable distinction of being the army to bring the Colt Army Special to the war. These guns were created in order to compete with Smith & Wesson's what would become the K-frame that everybody's so familiar with. We already have an episode on that, and we very quickly will have an episode on this one in the next couple weeks. But Greece actually ordered these from Colt, but it doesn't appear that Greece did it directly. Again, it appears it went through France because all the factory letters for these say that the contract was to France. And we know that France didn't field them, and they are actually marked with Greek markings on the heel. Here, let's zoom in for a moment. So if we look down here, and I'll pop a photo to you guys so you can show it more easily, these are going to be marked by the Greek Royal Army or Greek Navy, and they are just chambered in regular old 38 Smith & Wesson Special. So they're just a regular side eject, simultaneous eject, 38 Special, beautiful revolver, honestly, although this one's a little rough because it went through the Ottoman Empire to get back to us. As a matter of fact, I spoke to the man who sold this to us. He had taken it out of Turkey in the 50s, so this probably went to the Ottoman Empire at some point during the conflict and therefore made it back to the US that way. Not a lot special about these double single action revolver. We've talked about a lot of these features, but again, kind of interesting because this is a very good quality weapon. I mean, we've seen a lot worse from a lot of other powers. And again, complicated, kind of expensive. It's right there with that mannlicher-schoenauer that's like one of the best of that thing. It's one of the best revolvers you can get. It's one of the best bolt action rifles you can get. They're both fairly pricey, although these were acquired during the war. Now, not necessarily during the war for Greece. It looks like 1915, 1916 again, but these are not something that they pre-planned. Before the hand, they probably had a lot of private purchases, and it looks like they had the ruby and some other things of French design. But during the war, this is the new Greek handgun, and they bring this in along with the 38 special cartridge, which is actually a very good cartridge. This is a very reasonable military handgun. So again, surprise, surprise, Greece leads the way. And I think it's just one of those interesting things of being a late adopter. You come to the party late, and you get to pick over the best features. They're not involved in the arms race that was sweeping Europe, not by much. I mean, yes, they bought a Gras when that was important, and then they kind of sat around and made do with little bits of smaller contracts, and then they finally adopted what they considered to be the best bolt-action rifle, and then they had a piecemeal set of handguns and generally what they could get, and then all of a sudden they go with a beautiful Colt Army Special or the very available Ruby as the French provide it to them. Greece used a lot of common sense in terms of arms selection. Now, the actual involvement in the war, as you said, is just plain weird.
If you'd like to go a little more in-depth about the weapons we talked about today, you can click right here to see Othais' channel C&Rsenal and learn more about that. Do not forget to like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. See you next time.